What's the first thing you tend to spot, and what does it generally tell you?
The first thing I spot usually is the owner is the operating system, that they end up becoming the bottleneck because everything goes.
We're talking about doing 12-hour days, 60, 70 hours a week. How does a 6-hour framework fit in? Are we saying it's 6 hours a day, 6 hours a week?
I was ending up running a 6-location, 48-person, over $4 million business in about 6 to 8 hours a week.
Welcome to Ask Frank. We're in 15 minutes. We have an expert answer one of our audience members' questions, and today we're really lucky to be joined by Sturdy McKee, who teaches owner-operators a framework called 6-Hour CEO, which is also his own framework. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, William. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So the question that we have today is one that we get a lot. And so I'm going to generalize it, but I run a trade business, handful of employees, doing 60, 70 hours a week, and my business lives inside my head and generally on my phone. So, I guess it'd be great if you can set the scene. You no doubt see this a lot. So, what's the first thing you tend to spot, and what does it generally tell you?
And the first thing I spot usually is the owner is the operating system, that they end up becoming the bottleneck because everything goes through them. We go out and start the business because we're really good at the thing we do, like the landscaping, right? Or if you're a plumber, or if you're a physical therapist, or you're an attorney. You go out and start it because you wanted to do things your own way. And you suddenly realize, well, especially as the business starts to grow, as you're successful because you are good, there's more to running a business than just being good at the craft.
And I guess, like I did, a lot of these, small business owners, they're running their entire business, off their phone, from their
right. And then their head.
The first thing, they have to get out of their head and onto paper, like what's the dumbest, simplest tool that they can use to do that?
Yeah, I love that question. So, the dumbest, simplest tool is a whiteboard in their office,
yep.
or maybe a Google sheet that they share with their team. But the first move is to just start making the work visible, because like you just said, it's all in their head. So we just want a one-page kind of map of what happens. So like if in a contractor situation, how does work come in? How does it become a job? Who touches it? Where handoffs happen? Where does the owner get pulled in? Where do promises get missed? You see these opportunities and these problems, and every problem's an opportunity, right? But you can't delegate invisible work. So you can't fix and start getting, part of your job, I like to say this, is get what's in your head out of your head into other people's heads. That's part of what you sign up. And the best way to do that is to start committing to some kind of long-term memory. Start, documenting, writing stuff down.
And I guess, one of the pitfalls I know that I fell into it is that, okay, in order to do this, I need to hire someone, right? I guess,
yeah.
When is that wrong, right? And what should they systemize first, right? So that, that, I guess they can set that higher up for success.
Yeah. There's a lot of pressure and a lot of people telling you to hire and to work on your business, get out of, not work in the business. I think it's, especially at the size, right? If I got a handful of employees, 5 to 10, 8 to 10, and a couple $1 million, hiring is an additional expense. And now the good news about that size is that that's an ideal size for one person to manage. Okay. And as you grow and as you add units of 8 to 12 people, that's when you have to start bringing in additional managers and stuff. But there's a multiplier, there's a structure for all that, is just scale. But 8 to 10 people is not too many to manage, right? If you have structure and know how to do it.
I guess it's a really good segue, right? Because, we're talking about doing 12-hour days, 60, 70 hours a week. How does a 6-hour framework fit in, right? Are we saying it's 6 hours a day, 6 hours a week? Like, maybe, yeah. How does that work?
Yeah.
I'd love to peel that back.
You're baking the pies, you're treating the patients, or you're out there, building stuff. And then you've got to go run the business. And one of the things I did was I went outside the profession after about 2 or 3 years because I was struggling. I was hiring people within the profession. It was terrible. Nothing helped. Nothing moved us forward. I went outside and started just learning straight up business tools. And within 6 weeks, we were making more profit than ever before. And within about 12 weeks, I was done with my days to 2:30. And I was like, wow, what just happened? Realized and built a framework, delegated, hired good people, but with real clear objectives and roles, exactly what it was to do, how it all fit together. And when I learned all that, I was ending up running a 6-location, 48-person, over $4 million business in about 6 to 8 hours a week. And but the little trick though, Willie, is so is almost everybody else. You're just not necessarily doing it well because if you're treating patients or you're, on the job or you're designing or you're cooking or you're brewing or you're whatever, essentially full time or 80% of the time, then you've only got a few hours left to run the business. So, the better you get at that and the more structure you put in place, the better off your business is. But you free yourself up from being, and this is a big part of the transition, the mindset transition to the 6-hour CEO, is you go from being the hardest working player on the field to being the coach.
I
Right?
think you touched on something there around like your identity being wrapped up in A, how hard you're working, B, you're the person. How do you actually teach people to try and to separate the two, right? To almost show it that it's having somewhat.
I need to have a process and system so I'm not constantly trying to figure it out and reinvent it. And that's the idea behind writing stuff down. And the same thing is true of most business, right? You're not the first landscaper to ever exist. You're not reinventing the wheel, or you shouldn't be. You take best practices, you take the things that have worked for others, you systematize, you operationalize those things, you put them in place, right?
Yeah. And also
Right.
when do they have time to when do they have time to go, right? I think that's another segue, which is when you're kind of looking at the support system around a small business owner, right? You've got your banker and your accountant, you've got your therapist. Where does a business coach come in? And when should someone be engaging with someone like you?
But we're severely limited on wisdom. And if you want to get 85 things that you can do to improve your business, you can Google that right now and you can find them. Which one first? What do you do? So that's the point at which if you want to grow or you want to get control over it and reclaim your life and you want to know what to do first and how to prioritize, that's when you reach out for, talk to a coach, right? And that kind of goes back to the marketing and word of mouth. That's everybody's most powerful channel.
Yeah, of
right?
course.
You do a good job for somebody, they're going to tell somebody else. That is a great channel. It means you're delivering. It also means it's very low cost.
I guess I'm a big proponent of when you've got a big challenge in front of you, like, what's the saying? How do you eat an elephant? It's, one bite at a time, right? Is there a place that you'd like to start, right? Just to get a little bit of momentum, whether that be like, finance, whether that be, I don't know, inbound calls, whether that be marketing. I mean, is there a little bit of a cheat sheet or a framework, or is it business by business?
Well, we'll try this and you can kind of tell me if it fits. Once again, it'll probably fit most. But yes, there's always a bit of customization. There's always, maybe this isn't your priority or you've already done it, right? So then there's a different starting point because that definitely happens. And that's also, you mentioned the coaching thing. That's the difference between a good coach and somebody giving you advice. Most people just give you advice, like whatever they did is what they tell you to do.
Yeah.
And there's no process for taking into account your context, your situation, your goals, where you currently are, where you want to get to, what your client base is like, what your ideal customer is like, what your relationships, what your finances. You've got to take all that stuff into account to really get somebody, to know that you're doing the right things in the right order. But, again, the first thing I would do, like this kind of scenario we started with, is make the work visible, start writing down a map of what happens. Set up a weekly scorecard for the business. And yeah, that could be tracking leads, looking at the bids or estimates sent out, jobs sold, active jobs, labor, and what's your capacity, what's your margin or cash and time. You figure out what the top 5 or 7 things are and kind of track those on a weekly or a monthly basis, depending. And then number 3 would be to have especially if you got a team, a weekly operating meeting. So it's scheduled same day, same time. It's not long. It has the same agenda. It goes over the scorecard. It updates it. I had somebody changing their one-on-one meeting agendas every week because it got boring. I'm like, boring is good in these meetings, right? That means things are working. Don't do that. But yeah, and then the other one, and this sometimes ends up being number 1. This sometimes is number 4, but is document the repeatable plays. So figure out like what are the 1 or 2 most important things a person does in their role, and then write those down. Right, whatever it is they do, and it can just be a checklist. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. You think about the front desk person in a medical practice. the number one most important thing they do is schedule new patients, right? Because if they don't schedule new patients, there are no repeat patients, and there's no copays to collect, and there's no people to see, there's no doctor, there's nothing else to do. So that's where I would start. And I would, I'm not a big fan of scripts in that case, but I want to make sure certain bullets are hit. So there's a checklist for that new patient appointment call, right? You can do the same thing for any new customer at, inbound leads. Do you have a process? Do you have checkpoints? Do you have qualification? Do you give them what they want? How do you structure that? So you write those plays down. And what's wild is you probably, like, for a PT practice that came up with 5 critical processes. And so you have plays, process, and metric. And, people are like, well, there's more than 5. Yes. But if you do these 5, are you likely to succeed? And they're kind of like, oh, yeah, and is there a 6 through 10? Yeah. But if I do 6 through 10 and don't do 1 through 5, am I going to succeed? And you're like, yeah, we won't be able to pay the bills well. You're like, yeah. So prioritize, right? Prioritize. And then the last part of that kind of brings up that segue, right? Is delegate that stuff, reassign ownership of those critical processes. So, figure out who's good at it, who likes doing it, who wants to,
No. And I was going to say, like, I think one of the things that you touched on, which I really like, is setting that vision, right? Because, everything can start to be tied back to that vision as you start to break things down. Hey, I'm the most important person in this business. Well, it's like, well, do you want to get to this stage, right?
Right.
And I think when you start breaking down these points, I mean, to your earlier point around lots of knowledge, very little wisdom, would you say having someone, let's say they don't have a business coach, try and find someone to keep them accountable to keeping these in, just in play at least while they're starting to get up and off the ground?
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's, again, I learned this, from a guy, he had an accountability buddy. So he had another business owner that knew that every week they got on the phone for 15 minutes, same time, same day, no matter where they were in the world, got on the phone, went over these, 5 things: status, what are you doing? What are you stuck? What do you need? But a lot of it was simply reporting in, because if I know I've got to tell you on Tuesday what I've been up to, and I haven't worked toward any of the goals, and I haven't done the stuff I said last week, and I haven't, I'm going to feel more accountable, more worried about getting that done, and more likely to get it done if I've committed to you, particularly verbally and in writing, what I'm going to do. Right. The irony of what I do as a business coach is I hold people accountable. In some ways you could think about, like, I'm their support, I'm their manager, their coach, because I really like the coach versus manager idea. But they pay me, right? They pay me, and they still show up going, oh, I didn't get this done, and they're feeling bad, and we're like, okay, so what do we do? How can we make that happen? But it's, I think sometimes in our just culture, Western culture in particular, but not even business culture, it is, if I sign the paychecks or I pay the bills or I'm your boss or title, then there's a tradition of command and control, and the world has shifted and changed, and the best, that's just one of the reasons I love this coach idea in sports. You can watch what's happening, right? You can see the result. You get a read on the culture just from the way the players and the teams interact, and how they handle themselves.
Right. And getting those people to do those.
But yeah, it's a great example.
I was actually just writing down leave the jersey, and then you literally just took the words right out of my, I mean, it's a very well known saying in New Zealand. I guess, just to round this out, if you could tell, every drowning small business owner in the country, one thing, what would it be?
Get the business out of your head. Okay. Yeah. And I don't mean forget about it. I mean, get those processes and the map, everything, take what's stored up here and start putting it down on paper. And again, I don't care if the paper is virtual, it's a Word doc, it's Google, whatever, or whiteboard, but get it in writing somewhere, because that ends up being the institutional memory and the long-term memory. And the other thing about getting out of your head, and I have a process, I'll calendar stuff, I'll make my to-do list, I'll knock them off one at a time, I put it through a filter, all this stuff, whatever. But you're making the work visible, you're writing down repeating processes, you're putting a weekly rhythm around the numbers and the decisions, and then you are freeing yourself up to do the most important work, which is building up your people and your systems. So you carry your standards. So they carry your standards, right? Without you needing to be involved in every moment. So, start getting it out of your head and set the standard and let other people know. And then, back to the whole coaching idea, your job is to put the players in their best position, most likely to succeed, right? Where they are most likely to succeed with the skills and the resources and whatever it is they need to succeed.
And work towards that vision, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
No,
I think sometimes when we talk vision, people are talking about setting goals and future and whatever. Like the person who's drowning right now, worry about that the next 90 days. The first 90 days, work on this stuff, get a little bit of breathing room, and then we can start planning 5 years out, 3 years out. But right now, get the stuff out of your head. Get it on other people's plate if you can.
thank you so much